Thank you all for being here. It's nice to have you here with us digitally, virtually. That's the word I was looking for. Um, so, our first question to get us started today and make sure that everybody out there knows what you've worked on is what branching narrative games have you worked on? Because that's our topic today is branching narrative. And how would you describe the choice structures in those games? Every branching narrative has different kinds of ways that choice structure can be defined. So, what were the guiding principles for the games that you worked on?
Cool. I can take it away if you'd
Go
like me
for it.
to. Hello, I'm Josh again. And the big branch narrative game that I've worked on is called Buddy Simulator 1984. It's made with a small team of four of my best friends. And we kind of just came together and we're like, let's just create a very story-driven game, but do something that maybe hasn't really been touched by the market much, and dig into the psychological horror. We wanted to kind of go into the horror of friendship and manipulation. That's not seen a lot in storytelling. So in Buddy Simulator, you have this virtual best friend that is basically trying to always keep you happy and occupied and just creating all these cool new things for you. And the game will upgrade as you play. So there's a lot of him just, trying to keep you pleased, and the choice structure in Buddy Simulator kind of comes from what we called the buddy system, which consisted of like small increments of points behind the scenes for every good and bad choice that the player did. And that could be anything from, choosing to help some townsfolk in the game, or completely ignoring your buddy when they've asked you not to do something. And because of like these little choices, they all kind of branched and added up to a few different endings we actually had in the game.
Were the when you say they're good and bad choices, is that like a moral value judgment or like a sensible play structure? Like what's the value there?
Yeah, I'd say leaning more towards like the moral judgment. Good and bad is maybe kind of too defined. There's a lot of like middle ground usually. A lot of the game you can actually type your responses out,
Mm-hmm.
and that adds a lot of player control to kind of answer and progress how they want to. Making your buddy really angry or not following his rules could eventually like lead to certain paths that normally would not happen if you're kind of trying to do it all perfectly.
And is it obvious in the game where the choices are leading you, or is it sort of more hidden and you don't realize until you get to the end and you're getting the endings, like what you were making choices about all the way along?
Yeah, I'd say it becomes a bit more obvious the more you progress, with the underlying theme of the kind of toxic relationship and this person or this buddy that's kind of hounding you and trying to be your only best friend. You get to see through his responses and his actions that he is, or they're unhappy, or they loved what you did, so they're going to give you this thing in game. An example of like a bad thing happening, if you have not been on their good side, or you're morally against what your buddy's trying to do, which is kind of manipulate you a lot, then they will start taking things out of the game permanently for you, and they can actually like change a lot of the visuals. So there's a lot of like fun push and pull to it.
Okay, cool. Um, who's next?
I'll jump in. So I've worked on two branching narrative games now. The most recent one was Invincible Presents Adam Eve. And it's interactive fiction. It's probably how I best describe it, where you can personalize your own adventure. The choices there, you have branching, but they always kind of meet at a certain point, usually at the end of a level or chapter in the game. And so the sort of choices where you have some, let's say, kind of customization in the way that the dialogue will present itself, or the characters will present themselves. In terms of core plot beats, they kind of come back to them at certain points, so it never gets too untenable from a writing perspective. And the other game that I worked on was The Walking Dead Last Mile, and there's a lot more moral choice in that game, a lot of high stakes, low stakes choices that really try to impact character perception and perspective. And towards the end, what I would say is like true branching, where you take a certain path, you make a choice, somebody's dead, you can't go back, you're on a completely different path than like this other path where this person is alive. And so with that, it's a little bit more emotionally based, whereas Adam Eve is a little bit more character and dialogue based in terms of the impact that the choice is having for the player.
Yeah. Just as a heads up for everybody, Stephanie and I actually worked on both of those games together.
We did.
So I'm going to go ahead and jump in now and say I would have also said I agree with everything that Stephanie said, but I also would say that Adam Eve was more of a the choices impacted who your character was and who you were playing as a character. So they were very character-driven choices, like, are you going to be angry in this situation? Are you going to be forgiving?
Yeah.
And so it impacted how you played as a character, not necessarily the events that occurred, but like your emotional reaction to those events. And then for The Walking Dead, there were also, I think, a lot of thematic choices in there. Like there were themes that we were following through for the entire season of that show, and then it was Are We game show, and it was are we following this theme to it down his path or this theme, and so there were a lot of choices that were thematic in nature.
Well, if there is anything that I
Reyes,
work
go
on
ahead.
that anyone recognizes at all, it's going to be Road Warden. It's an RPG that's very narrative-oriented, text-heavy, and it has this classic RPG branching type of narratives where you have dozens of tiny stories that are either some way entwined or are completely separate, isolated from the greater, larger, more encompassing stories. But at the same time, the majority of the game is focused on the character of Road Warden, who, as the name suggests, patrols the roads. And because of it, the game's protagonist sticks to the very clearly outlined paths that they can cross, they can follow. They can't enter the wilderness as they would in many other RPGs. So very often you're on the rails because the game forces you to stick to the roads because the wilderness is dangerous. You have to patrol the roads, you have to stick to the roads. But at the same time, I was playing with tons of tiny freedoms, ways to express your character or your personality as a player as you make choices in regards to how you want to approach various conflicts, various either moral choices or just opportunities that are thrown at you. So in this regard, I'd say that the way how many RPGs are structured when it comes to their branching narratives, in Road Warden's case, those branches are quite justified considering that you have to stay in your saddle following the main paths that are connecting various settlements that are spread over the map.
So when you in Warden, when the character did have to make a choice, or when the player did have to make a choice as to where they were going, was it mostly character driven, like as in who they wanted to play their character as, or was it like a hidden choice where it's like go left or go right down a branch in the road, and then you don't know
when you
what's going to
have to
happen until you
decide
get
if you want
there?
to turn left or right, but it was a part of my job to simply outline those choices as something you don't make completely in the blind, when you actually have some sort of information from other characters that live in the world, or by examining your surroundings when you try to establish which way is the safest one for you, or for example is more risky but possibly provides more opportunities that you could jump into. So I didn't want to just punish the players for making the choices that I couldn't really predict the outcomes of them. So yeah, because I had some experiences in the past where I just had this feeling that there is this illusion of choice where the outcome is a surprise without a setup. And I think that giving the player an opportunity to evaluate their situation, to decide how much of a risk they want to take on themselves is a part of what I find to be entertaining in games.
Cool. So, regardless of what we've all worked on in the past, what method of creating choices for the player is most interesting to you as a writer, and why?
I can go ahead and start this
Go for
one. So for me personally, the most interesting would be the ones that leave a lot of different branching paths for an ending that you really want or are planning for in your gameplay. I love when I'm playing a game and, I have the option to agree or disagree or, freely express yourself sometimes with your choices. And I think that gets a lot of points in my book, especially. And with Buddy Simulator, we have a lot of, especially in the beginning, ways to personalize the experience to you. You get to name your buddy, choose like your favorite colors and things like that. And I think it makes the game experience a lot more personal in the narrative when you play an active role and affect the things in their universe.
So your favorite form of branching narrative is one in which the player has a lot of impact and control.
Yes, yes. And you get to directly, visually or mechanically kind of like see the changes in the game.
Did you have any difficulty with Buddy Simulator in sort of technically accounting for all of the branches that you potentially wanted to give story-wise?
Most definitely. With a character like the AI buddy, we wanted to make them feel very personable and almost human-like. So there were tons of ways that we wanted to take it. The game only ended up having 4 endings, but we felt like there were 4 very distinct, very defined ways to end the game. With one being like a very bad ending, you've done everything wrong or bad, and you're trying to, hurt your friend type of thing. But yeah, I would say like that.
Okay, awesome. Interesting choices. Who likes, what is your favorite type of creating choices? Either
I
Stephanie or
actually
Arias, please, go ahead.
I actually have
Go ahead.
2 different types of responses to this question because from the narrative perspective, I really enjoy encountering opportunities to construct choices that encourage the player to compromise their integrity, their morality by gaining greater either advantages from even the narrative perspective or the mechanical perspective, where, for example, you can do the right thing, but you're not going to be rewarded for doing the right thing. If you're going to either lie to someone to make them feel better, or you're going to steal something from them without even giving them the opportunity to realize that you took something that belongs to them, but they don't really miss it. Do you want to do this or not? Because all the way back in the early 2000s, it was pretty much the requirement to construct storylines in which you were forced to give some opportunities to act in evil ways, but with the assumption that your evil acts are going to turn on you sooner or later. And I really enjoy it when I can construct some opportunities where I want the player to decide if they are going to feel good about some sort of act that they know is going to lead them to a better point in their story, where they're going to have greater tools on their hands, but at the same time, they may just feel like shit for doing it. And from the completely different perspective, I really like to spend some time on various scenes and just consider if they could get better by introducing more choices. So introducing choices in the moments when I can feel that the game is getting boring. I was by, for example, constructing a dialogue when it's starting to turn into an exposition where the player has pretty much no input into what's going on, or the choices they make are just a complete illusion. And I can just feel that then this scene could get much more interesting if I was to put maybe another an hour or 3 hours into just making some tiny additional branch that would add another just this pinch of spice to what's going on. So yeah.
Did you have technical issues on your end
Well,
when you
Road
wanted to
Warden
add extra
has
branching?
this great advantage that it relies on text so heavily that when, for example, I would get to rewrite some sort of task or quest, I could fix all sorts of issues in like one day. For example, I could introduce massive changes to a grand narrative because I wouldn't have to negotiate it with any producers and voice actors, and I could make tiny changes to some illustrations by just introducing a few additional pixels. And so in this regard, my limitations presentation-wise were an advantage.
That does sound like an advantage.
I have a
Stephanie,
quick question for you,
Go
actually.
ahead, Josh.
So I love text-based games, so I'm definitely going to be checking out Road Warden. But in the game, I'm curious, do you use visuals at all to emphasize some of the story points, or is it purely like old school text?
There are illustrations that, for example, portray the character's surroundings, which allow me to limit the length of text that is essential to actually introduce the most basic information. So I think that these are a great tool of expression to just introduce some brevity to the text, but still many people would say that the game gets a bit too lengthy at points, but I'm completely fine with this. There are also various interface icons. Items have their own icons in the inventory, and when it comes to the feedback, to having the illustrations actually reflect the outcomes of the player's actions, those are actually very limited. So sometimes there is going to be a few details in regards to a specific either area or the world map that are going to change depending on the player's actions. But as a protagonist, you actually have a very limited power level in this setting, and therefore a very limited opportunities as a player to actually introduce those major world-shaking changes that would be common for most RPGs. So those tiny changes, once they come, they matter, and I think they taste especially I know, maybe sweet, maybe I forgot the word. Sour, let's say.
Happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
So I actually I played the demo for both Road Warden and Buddy Simulator, and I'm interested to see because both of them, like, I'm not sure if Buddy Simulator changes over time, but both of them do have heavy text components. And so I'm curious, Stephanie, if you like what your thoughts are about choices, because I know that both of the games that you worked on had very heavy art elements to them, which really restricted like some choice abilities. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on like what kind of choices you find interesting.
Yeah, I would say that art doesn't restrict. You just have to do more planning in advance. You can't decide to change everything at the last moment, but it doesn't actually restrict. You just need to think strategically. We love art over here. But for me, what I really like about choices, I like choices that have equal weight, where it's not like one is good or one is bad or one is the correct or one is the wrong choice to make. They're both choices that are associated with stakes, and they're both equally good or equally bad. And so the decision behind it is really just the experience that you want to have, and you can have kind of some true branching that happens at those moments. I also really enjoy choices that define the plot and shape the character at the same time, where I could use an example of like Heavy Rain does this really good. It's just like an older game. Quantic Dream is one of my favorite studios, but they have a choice where you can go on these different things that your child's kidnapper has basically sent you on, and you can choose to like go to this house and kill this person because they ordered you to, or you can choose like I'm not going to kill them at all, or you can go to the house and then you can talk to the person and then decide not to kill them, or whatever the case may be. But like the choices that you make actively shapes the plot, because if you don't do it, they don't give you a clue that you need to find your child. Like it's like permanent. But if you do as well, like it also kind of shapes the way that you see that person as a father and like that character overall. So when those two things are tied together, I think it can be really nice just for like the gameplay aspects, because I'd say like gameplay first is like very important, but also like defining your experience as a player and playing the game that you want to play it. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
I think so. So what you're saying is you like choices that have different options, but where all options are weighted equally. Where it's not like there's the right choice and the wrong choice. It's just like you just have to decide what to do, and it's not
Yeah.
necessarily a given what you should pick.
Yeah, because I think if you come into a game and the choices are, very apparent, like this is evil, or this is bad, or this is something else, you kind of are choosing one way to play, and then you usually just kind of stay down that path. Versus when you're making different choices at intervals that are neither like following a good nor evil path, you can kind of get like a myriad experience in terms of the gameplay. And it gives you a balance of like, okay, I did this, so I have an idea of what's about to happen, but also like some unexpected surprise, because we don't know if this is going to turn out good or bad, because we don't even know if this choice was better than the other choice, because both of them seemed bad, or both of them seemed good. So I think that can be nice. I mean, you can't like surprise the player in such a way that, you make a choice to go left and then what do you know? Someone shot you that way. Like it has to connect. It can't make absolutely no sense. But like giving them like a fun surprise that like works within the structure of the narrative and the gameplay is like a nice element that you can add when you have choices that seemingly on paper are equal in weight.
I think that leads really nicely into the next question, which is, are there any choice structures that you personally really dislike and why? And it leads really nicely because for me personally, the choice structure that I really don't like is one that is intended to be morality based, and not morality based like you have to make a moral decision and there's different elements that you have to weight, but just like this is good and this is bad, right? Like the ones where it's like you're gonna take the light side or the dark side, and if you take the dark side, then you're just gonna get, you know, influence points with this faction, and if you take the light side, then you get influence points with this faction, and it doesn't even really like. I don't know. And then
I'm laughing because she's directly referencing something that we
no, I didn't mean it that way. Anyway, no, the point is, like, I don't really love things that are intended to be, well, this is good and this is bad, because in addition to, I think being less interesting for the player, I also think that there's just way too many complexities in there. Like a player might come up to a situation and be like, well, I'm going to make the morally right choice and like save this child, but then it turns out that actually what they did was they stole the child from their rightful parents or something. And you know, it gets really complicated when you start talking about morality. And I think it's, for me personally, I think it's more interesting when you include in the story the fact that morality in real life is complicated. And that there's not necessarily an all right decision or an all wrong decision. And so when anytime a narrative can take that into account and present it like, well, you have to make this choice and maybe you're doing something bad, but it is for your survival. So like, does that weigh off or anything like that? So just my personal dislike is like just the black and white moral narrative. Those aren't my jam. But do you have any that you don't particularly care for?
I'm going to jump in right away. I would say that not really a specific choice, but using the same type of choice methodology over and over and over again, I think is what I particularly don't like. If you have, like, let's say a choice is high stakes, life or death. Okay. But if every choice is high stakes, life or death, and you've actually kind of diluted the high stakeness of it because it's happening all the time. Or if every choice is morally yet right or wrong, then it's like the developer is now the moral center of God and like deciding what is correct for the world that you're like existing in. And so I think that really varying those choices, like varying the types of choices that you have, not only makes it more engaging, but it prevents that from becoming really stale. And any choice or any type of choice, if done really well, can be really powerful. I recently, maybe like a few months ago, I checked out this game called Endling Extinction is Forever. It's not really a choice-based narrative game. But at the beginning of the game, you play as a fox, a mother fox who's like trying to survive in the forest with industrialization, and you have like 4 baby foxes. And at the beginning of the game, it's just like a customization option where you can like choose like, does this baby fox have spots, and like, is it like a darker orange or brown? And so I was like customizing my babies, naming all of them, just having a great time, just like, you know, playing around, like typical like beginning of the game customization. And then shortly thereafter, one of your baby foxes gets kidnapped. And because you customized them, you know exactly what fox it was taken, and my fox had a name. Like, I was much more emotionally attached to the fox that I lost my baby versus I just lost a random fox when they all look alike. And that simple choice of customization, like, now was able to have an emotional impact. Now, if I had customization choice the entire game, I probably would just get irritated and stop playing it. But, like, using it one time really effectively, worked. So I think it's really about, like, not one that's, like, bad, but knowing when to use what type of choice. Because I even think a black or white moral gray choice can be really impactful and good if you build the narrative and you build the story to such a point where now this really makes sense for the character, and on the surface it may just be black or white, but you're actually really saying something important about their character development or et cetera that you've been through. So that's me.
Valid.
I got one that it's pretty much what both of you have said so far, which I 100% agree with. But yeah, it's always when, I'm playing a game and I get disheartened when I'm loving this amazing narrative and I'm making all these decisions, and then I kind of get shoehorned into like an ending or like a role, like light side or dark side, that it's like it doesn't really fit the agenda or the gameplay that I was kind of playing.
Yeah.
And it's not always a bad thing, but it's just so rewarding to actually see your choices matter, whether like visually or like in text form by the end. And a good example of a game that has a bunch of really great narrative, but I love to critique, is Starfield recently. I've been playing a lot of it, and there's so many different fun and branching paths you can take. And I was like, you know what? Sick of being a good guy. I just want to be space criminal, badass pirate. And come to find out, you really can't do that. And it's something I'm not sure why Bethesda chose, but they can tease you a lot with like these evil choices you can do, but you find out there's very little in the way of like rewarding you for being a bad guy and rewarding narrative when there's not really much there that they have like provided. And it's like, like you set it all up for me, and I really can't have the the satisfaction of playing the game how I want to play.
So you would say like agency and results is the most important thing. You just don't want to have choices that you're making that aren't going anywhere.
Most definitely, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm taking away from your job, Jessica.
No, I'm happy. Everyone, please join in my job.
I think,
Arius, go ahead.
yeah, I think it's...
Do you have a choice kind
in a
that you
way
particularly
connected
dislike or not so
with
much?
everything you said so far, because this attitude that you need to have a choice and an anti-choice that are going to build this dramatic tension. I think in the recent years I've seen that many games have been introducing this idea that not making a choice is a choice, that being passive, or ignoring some sort of activities maybe even more interesting to explore than just giving the player, for example, instead of giving the player an opportunity to either defend a village or join the orcs and destroy the village, you can just focus on, do you want to help those people, or do you want to go your way and just ignore their needs? And many years ago, when the second Mass Effect released, it inspired me greatly by this idea that if you want to play the game as you would play many RPGs, you're going to be punished by the game's narrative, because there is this great point of dramatic stakes getting to the top where the enemy comes, they kill many people, kidnap many more, and you have this choice to follow the kidnappers and try to save your crew. But if you want to do what most people would do, and I definitely would do, is play more to complete all the side quests, all the additional activities, to just level up your character as much as you can. And if you decide to play the completionist route, you're going to find out that, well, you were waiting too long by ignoring the great need of the people who were kidnapped and who were portrayed as being in great need of immediate rescue. You actually brought doom on them, and it's because of your decision. And by deciding that you as a player can wait as long as you always want, as you can, for example, in games like Skyrim. You can take your time. The world is about to end, but you can, for example, go fetch some, radish or whatever. But when the game actually tries to pay attention to the fact that by being passive, by ignoring the great call of people in need, you actually harm them, I think those type of narratives introduce a lot of interesting tension. And the games that try to ignore this fact, I think, start annoying me more and more as the time goes on.
Yeah. So you really like the narrative
Yes.
consistency of, we've given you an urgent choice. It is actually urgent that you do something about it. Yeah.
I would say for something like that, it would be interesting how that's communicated to the player, because it's almost like a gameplay conceit that if they're like, oh my gosh, this village is on fire, you know that the village is really only on fire until you go over there and start that mission, you know? And so there's kind of like, if you played a lot of video games, like even on like Tomb Raider, it's like, oh my gosh, they're getting attacked. You know, you don't really have to go over there right now. Like when you go over there, they will be getting attacked and that part of the gameplay will start. So I just feel like in a game that you're describing, I think how to basically unteach something that is already ingrained in my mind as a gamer, as this is how narrative and cinematics work. Like communicating that so that way I understand that I'm going to be punishing for it versus just punishing me for it and I didn't even know that was going to happen. I can see like an interesting balance.
Don't want to introduce this type of decision-making process only when the stakes are on their highest. So you want to actually prepare the player ahead of the time that this is the method, this artistic approach that we took, where you are going to make those tiny decisions where your inactions are going to bring consequences. And then after some time, once the greatest acts of passivity are introduced, those are not surprises anymore and feel justified.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. Yeah.
What is your favorite branching narrative that you didn't work on? Your favorite branching narrative game that you didn't work on? And what makes it your favorite? Was there a choice you particularly liked? Why?
I got a quick one.
Go ahead.
But there is this indie game that came out a few years ago, and I think the second one just came out, called Oxenfree, and it's like a supernatural coming of age story, and I just love how the story progresses and how you build your relationships with like these other characters. You basically get to this island on a boat with some of your best friends, and a lot of kind of spooky stuff starts happening, and there's a lot of downtime just to talk and get to know the characters. And my favorite choice in the game is kind of how you use this mechanic. It's a radio that you have to kind of tune stations, and you hear some like disembodied voices as you're putting together like puzzles and trying to figure out what's going on. But it's how you interact with them and your friends right after that can really like change the gameplay and the ending drastically. Very, very fun game.
I would say 2. I don't know if we're allowed to do that, but I'm going to.
Go ahead. Why not?
1 is really not a branching narrative game, but there is a critical choice in the game.
Oh, that's not allowed. I'm sorry.
I'm going to continue. Thank you. Anyway, I'm going to continue. It would be my favorite game is BioShock, and there's a choice in that game. I guess BioShock is old enough that I feel like I can just say whatever I want about the plot. There's a choice in that game where you can choose to harvest these characters for like this really valuable resource, or you can actually save them, but you get less of the valuable resource. And that same choice is presented basically every time you like beat a certain point in the game where you get confronted with this resource again. And it happens many, many times throughout the game. And the first time it happens, there is someone that kind of like is trying to convince you to do one or the other. But then after that, you literally just make the choice. And it's like, do I really need this resource right now? And it doesn't seem to have any consequence whatsoever until the very end of the game, where it comes back to like really be prominent, to making it capable for you to like actually win the game. And that is really interesting to me, because you're actively making the choice the entire time, but you're not really aware of how much impact it has. And because you're making the same choice so repetitively, you're almost detached from it morally. And so that's, I think, is really fun. And then my other like traditional branching narrative game would be Detroit Become Human. I love Quantic Dream. I'm going to have to play a Star Wars game next because of them, which is, you know, whatever. I guess I'm going to play it since you guys are making it. But I love Quantic Dream. And Detroit, it has one scene in particular that I really like when you're rushing this like news station to try to like do this broadcast, and you get to play from like you play as 3 different characters throughout the game, and it's 2 characters that are involved in this mission, and so you can play on both sides. And there's just a lot of interesting aspects and things that can happen as a result of how that goes, and that's kind of like a key turning point in the game that is like one of the first like big choices that can impact the way you get to the end of the game and how you were perceived by the other characters in the game, whether or not you're successful in this mission or bad in this mission or die. You can also die in this mission. Actually, the first time I played Detroit, me and my friend died here, and we were like, we're going to start the whole game over because we don't want to lose this character, and we did. But yeah, I would say that game I really like, and they have some really good choice structures that are very different. And the fact that you can play as 3 different characters, I think, really adds a lot to it. That's like a cool aspect of it to kind of give you some new perspective on the game. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, it's.
Arius?
I really want to say Pentiment, a game by Obsidian from 2022, but I really need to watch out to just not drop a ton of spoilers on you, because this game is both very young and brilliant, and it's very easy to spoil it. But it's kind of a branch narrative, but also kind of not. It very strongly plays with the idea that there is some agency put on you as a player, and your decisions definitely have strong, lasting outcomes and leave the mark on the world. But at the same time, this agency, those outcomes often are manifested in ways you as a player don't expect. Or at least I should maybe speak just for myself. I was so surprised in so many ways by the way this game handled my decisions, and trying to not spoil it, but my favorite moment was related to a character that's kind of maybe not related to you, but is very close to you, and you can decide to either neglect their emotional well-being, or you can pay close attention to them. You can give them the words of wisdom to not follow your example, to not repeat your own mistakes, you can give them the type of attention you as a protagonist really would require if you were in their spot. And once a moment of crisis comes, you can tell this character, just get out, leave me behind, you need to look after yourself right now, I need you to go. And if up to this point you've made this character truly love you, you've made them really care about you, they are not going to leave. They're going to ignore your command because you're so important to them that they're going to put your own well-being above their safety, and it's going to end up very badly for them. If you truly want to keep them safe, you need to be an asshole to them. And you as a player don't expect that, probably. That's you as a character.
I will say that is a not good job of not doing a spoiler, because that was a spoiler. That was like 100% a spoiler. But
it's fascinating.
It is fascinating,
that's
but
a
like you were like,
fascinating choice.
I'm not going to
what
give a
type of
spoiler, and then you
character
proceeded
this
to
is.
100% give a spoiler. But
We should just have a big banner over the screen that's like, by the way, spoilers.
I never heard of this game, but you sold me on
Really?
it.
Yeah, I know. Now I kind of want to play. I'm like,
oh, I'm
The
surprised you haven't heard
artist
of it. But
gorgeous
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah, the
God
art
damn,
is
this game was
very
made
interesting.
for me. It's exactly the type of field I was studying on the university. So the old codices with their hand illuminated laborious pages are just fantastic to see so masterfully presented in this game. It's beautiful.
That's amazing. Well, I will go ahead and tell you all that I'm cheating on this question because my favorite game that has branching narrative that I did not work on is Dungeons and Dragons. And that is not a video game, but it's still my favorite. So there we go.
We'll allow it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. We are running close to our time. I'm sorry, we have not gotten to any of our additional questions. But first of all, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. Anything anyone wants to promo real quick?
The game that I'm on is probably not going to come out until next year. I have no idea actually when,
Yeah,
so I can't. I can't help you.
Our studio has a new game in the works. We just announced last month, hoping to release in the next few months. So very excited about that one. Another narrative-driven horror game.
What is it called?
That sounds great.
It's called Beneath the Frost.
Okay.
I'm working on a prototype.
Keep an eye.
I don't
Alright.
want to talk about
Arius?
it too much because, well, I'm still having the negotiations phase
Alright.
with the producers ahead of me, so I'm holding my cards.
Totally valid. And Terrible Posture actually has a game that's going to be part of LudoNarraCon's official selection. It's called Battle Train, so keep an eye out for
Oh, I didn't realize that Battle Train was coming out then. Look at that. Nobody tells me these things.
Is that the one with the very like steampunky, surreal kind of feel to it?
that. I'll tell you all later because we're about to run out of time.
Yeah,
Can't
yeah.
wait.
So yeah, I guess I technically do have a game that I worked out coming out soon because Battle Train.
There you go.
Thank you, everyone who tuned in. We appreciate you showing up and watching our panel, and thank you all for
Bye.
being here and giving us your time.